Okay, we're going to talk about human-centered design for the design portion of our lecture. And you might have heard this phrase before. It's kind of become a big buzzword in the design industry, and every designer calls himself a human-centered designer. But that's not necessarily true. But regardless of whatever that is, we'll talk quickly about what human-centered design is and how you can implement it into your own design processes whether that comes to your own websites or other parts of your life. So what is human-centered design? As you might imagine, human-centered design is a design approach that incorporates the human perspective. So it essentially asks that question, what works best for humans? Now, you might think that's a pretty silly question to ask because, well, we build websites for humans, not any other creatures. Actually, we build websites for AI now too, but we build websites mostly for humans, and we design software and technology mostly to be used by humans. So seems silly to really think about it like, well, if we're not designing for humans, then what are we exactly designing for? Well, actually, for a very long time, a lot of design processes, or just design in general, didn't really consider this human aspect. Designers sometimes like to go crazy with all sorts of fancy colors and things, when sometimes what's most important is what's relevant to the actual user itself. So that's what we're going to get into today, and it's something that I hope you can try and maybe incorporate into your own design when you start working on your final projects. So I went into a little bit about this, but why human-centered design? It's really important to think about because, again, like I said, you're designing. This course is we're trying to teach you how to design websites or make and design websites to be used for yourself and for other people. And so empathizing with others and really understanding how other humans work, that's what allows us to design things that are actually useful and effective. You can write the most brilliant software or program or website in the world, and if it's not something that people can actually use effectively, then all of that was really done for nothing. Here's a little bit about like the workflow for what it looks like when it comes to human-centered design. So there's 4 stages that we'll get into, and we'll talk about all 4 of these throughout the course of this part of the lecture. First is analysis, second is design, third is evaluation, and last is implementation. So we're going to start with analysis. And what this looks like is user research and defining the problem space. For design, we get into ideation. For evaluation, we talk about user testing. And for implementation, this is where we get into prototyping and fabrication. So let's quickly talk about what user research looks like. Some of you might be in data science or statistics classes and know what it's like to create a poll or create some kind of sample that gathers data from your user base to figure out what it is you want to necessarily do. In this case, what user research really means is we ask the question, how can we empathize with our potential users? That word empathy essentially means put yourself in the shoes of the user that's going to be using your program or website. Other questions that we can ask here are, what do our users actually need and want? And how will our users actually interact with our product or similar ones? These are important questions to ask because while you yourself might be pretty knowledgeable in the tech space or fairly confident in understanding how your program works, understanding that a new user, completely new to your program, might have no idea how to handle certain situations or how to use your product at all. And so being able to put yourself in the shoes of a new user is actually pretty important. And we do this through user research. User research methods can vary. Sometimes they can be as direct as creating interviews with users themselves. So this could be a collection of anecdotes, experiences, and focus. There's this phrase right here, the contextual inquiry, essentially shadowing a user as they go through a process of using software. And like I said, it's difficult if you're the person writing the software or you're the person creating the website. You've been through you've designed the entire project. You programmed the entire project from the ground up, and so you obviously are very familiar with everything that's around. But a new user might find it difficult to go through your project or your software, and so being able to shadow a new user, is pretty helpful information. Other potential methods are things such as surveys. These are very large, broad scans, and what's useful about these is you get a lot of data about your for user research, but understanding that this feedback might not be very specific. but it is useful to get a very wide range of opinions about your product. Card sorting, this is where we observe how users reflect on their experience by grouping ideas. We'll get a little bit more into this later. Desk research, essentially just going online and figuring out what works for other people. The field of design has been around forever, and so there's a lot of really good resources out there to help you understand what might be good. And that's why we actually get you to read an article from Medium about what good design practices every week as part of your homework. And finally, ethnographic research. This just refers to just observation, what you look like, what the world around you looks like on a daily basis, your own apps that you use on your phone, etc. The rules of thumb, there are essentially 3 things that we want to keep in mind: empathy, neutrality, and simplicity. Like I said, empathy, putting yourself in the shoes of your user. What does the experience look like for a brand new user? Neutrality being essentially keeping in mind the comfort of the people that you're performing research on, their time, any biases that might come into play, and just the attention, being appreciative of the attention that they're providing. So essentially, anytime you're conducting user research, you understand that the users are giving up their time and their energy and their effort to help you along in your process. And so making sure that we follow these 3 rules enables us to get the best type of feedback, as well as the best type of, essentially allows us to gather the best quality of data as well. Now that we have our user research down, we can narrow down what the user actually needs. And so it's essentially this idea of how do we solve this problem? How might we figure out what it is that we actually want to do? And so this is where we come into this stage called ideation. After we've completed our user research, we want to synthesize our findings. And you'll probably be able to find that there are clear groups of users with similar types of experiences. What we can do here is we can make a persona. This is a character that represents a group of individuals. Let's say that there's a group of individuals that all are essentially new users to your website or new users to your software. They can be grouped under maybe one category, one fake character that explains what the needs and wants of this type of group are. Or maybe you have people who are much more experienced in navigating a technical piece of software. And so that might be another group entirely. This is this is what one of these might look like. Essentially, you can see that there are personas created on the screen for a different set of characters. The types of goals, needs, pain points. That's a pretty common phrase that you might hear. Pain points really just means any really important issues that are important to a user to address, essentially, some things that users might find frustrating. And those are going to vary depending on the types of personas that you're dealing with. Being able to create these personas and lay them all out allows you to design your website or software for a wide array of people, not just a specific group. And so this is why these things are very important. The next thing that we want to talk about is there a clear process users seem to follow? So this is what we call a journey map, a timeline of the user experience. And it could look something like this. Again, by the way, all these things that I'm showing are just examples of what these things could look like. Obviously, every designer is unique to themselves, and you can do what works best for you. But this could be something like a journey map of essentially. In this example, it's about changing mobile plans, so that might not necessarily be too relevant to navigating a website. But you can imagine, for example, if you're designing a website for a store or an online shop, what does that entire process look like from a user first entering the website to selecting a product to checking out and finally getting that order confirmation, right? Knowing the timeline of how a user navigates through your website is pretty important because it allows us to make informed design decisions, specifically human-centered design decisions. And finally, affinity maps. This is where we can essentially put together all our insights, narrow down ideas, and more. So this could look like a post-it grouping of ideas and observations. What this looks like is something like this, just a wall full of post-it notes. Again, this works for some people, this doesn't work for other people. I like to throw all my thoughts into a Google Doc. That's what works for me. But anything that groups together all your ideas is definitely very useful at the very end. Okay, we talked about these rules of thumbs. Essentially, the first one, most important, be empathetic. The user's needs are much more important than what you think is cool. Whatever is flashy, something that looks like really like whatever you think is really cool, if it doesn't help the user accomplish their needs, it's not good human-centered design, essentially. Second, be observant. Again, there's a lot of humans are pretty predictable on a large scale, and so we can think about repetition or trends. We must consider edge cases. We can also think about what emotions people are going through as they're navigating. Finally, being open and being inclusive. It's important to think about what we haven't considered, and also especially who we haven't considered. We want to make our tech as accessible to everybody as possible. Okay, this stage, the next stage is user testing. And this is where we want to understand if we want to move forward with our ideas, what needs to be fixed, and what we are addressing. So essentially, there's a couple ways to go through testing methods. The first method would be just you go up to random people in public and ask them to test your product. That's random and that's fast, but it's not necessarily in-depth. And for more in-depth personal testing, we can use these things called contextual inquiries or moderated usability tests. So contextual inquiries are questions that we can directly ask users in a sort of feedback form, while moderated usability tests are these essentially tests that you can, tests that you can run on during your website that might be able to measure the impact of how things are doing. So for example, if you decide to make a change on how your website, the process of going through your website does, you might be able to select, say, okay, half the time on the website, I'm going to display the old version, and half the time when a user opens the website, they're going to see the new version. And you can actually are able to, one metric you can measure is the time it takes for someone to go from, let's use the online store example again, go from seeing an item they want to purchase to completing the purchase. You can take the time to measure how long it takes to do both those processes from the old website to the new website. And that supervised testing actually gives you a really good idea of what, or like a really good point of comparison between the two versions. And finally, for larger scale testing, we can use this thing called unmoderated or remote usability tests. Essentially, these are unsupervised tests that we get, or unsupervised tasks that we can get more feedback from. Okay, I've talked a lot about the initial stages of design and how we can collect research and feedback. This is essentially the stage that you've all actually already been through already. So we've all asked you to create a Figma mockup for your midterm. And essentially, that's what prototyping and fabrication is. It's that stage where you're actually putting all your ideas after synthesizing and collecting all the information into a working mockup that you can then use to actually put your website together. Okay, we're going to move on to essentially one of the final stages, iteration for optimization. This is, as you can see, the entire stage, like the 4-stage cycle that I showed earlier and that we've been talking about, they depend on each other and they do something, they back propagate as well. What that essentially means is it's almost never a completely done process, and there's always room for improvement. And so each of these cycles, each of these stages depend on each other, and you can definitely continue to go back and forth between the stages to continue to make your website better. All right, I've been talking for a while about human-centered design. I think it's a super cool topic, but does anyone have any questions they want to share or ask? Okay, if not,